أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
So we are reading the 23rd word, second remark, page 334 in the book, and probably on either side. Before I begin, maybe someone online or here can summarize for us last week's.
So last week we briefly covered how the evil commanding soul commit infinite crimes by attributing creation of anything to itself. And we also briefly covered the verse that says God will change their evil into good. So really about acknowledging that everything is created by the one that gives existence to everything. And so with that concept and internalizing that can help transform that which the evil appropriate to itself to its real owner, and that can save us from any kind of false assumptions and thus starting to receive light or the truth. And that's about it. If anyone else remembers something else and wants to add on, go for it.
Thank you, Fariha, for that summary. If no one else has any other comments, I'll just start reading.
Or you can ask someone else to read if you want. Like you have the power to ask people.
Do we have any volunteers?
Okay.
Do we have any volunteers who'd like to read? I can't see who's online, but if anyone would like to volunteer to read, that would be wonderful for me.
No volunteers.
Okay, inshallah, I'll read them. Man has two faces. One, concerning his ego, looks to the life of this world. The other, concerning worship and servitude to God, looks to eternal life. Man has two faces. One, concerning his ego, looks to the life of this world. The other, concerning worship and servitude to God, looks to eternal life. In respect to the first face, that looks to his ego, that concerns his ego rather, he is a wretched creature whose capital consists only of the following. Of will, he has only a partial power of choice, like a hair. Of power, a weak ability to acquire. Of life, a fast dying flame. Of a lifespan, a fleeting brief spell. And of being, a swiftly decaying small body. Together with this, he is one delicate, weak individual out of the innumerable individuals of the numberless varieties of beings dispersed through the levels of the universe. In respect to the first face, he is a wretched creature whose capital consists only of the following. Of will, he has only a partial power of choice, like a hair. Of power, a weak ability to acquire. Of life, a fast dying flame. Of a lifespan, a fleeting brief spell. And of being, a swiftly decaying small body. Together with this, he is one delicate, weak individual out of the innumerable individuals of the numberless varieties of beings dispersed through the levels of the universe. In respect of the second face, and especially his impotence and poverty, which are turned towards worship, man has truly great breadth and vast importance. For the all-wise Creator has included in man's nature an infinitely vast impotence and boundlessly huge poverty, so that he can be an extensive mirror containing the innumerable manifestations of an all-powerful and compassionate one, whose power is infinite, an all-generous, all-rich one, whose wealth is boundless. Before I go on, I think I want to just pause here a bit, because there's quite a lot being talked about. My initial comment is that I feel like this runs parallel to the point the author had previously made about man's two aspects, one regarding positivity, creation, goodness, and the other regarding destruction and tendency towards evil. I think while these are distinct, still run a similar line of thought. And almost, at least for the first statement, when it says, one concerning his ego looks to the life of this world, I know that someone had previously asked the question of what we are to understand of ego, one's ego. But putting that question to the side as well, which I'd like to return to, I think I would read it as one concerning his ego can only look to the life of this world, and the other concerning worship and servitude to God must look to eternal life. But I would want to ask why this is so, and how this can fit into the context of what we've been speaking about so far. So if anyone has any comments they'd like to share, please do so.
Can you rephrase your question for me?
I mean, it wasn't just one question really, but a multitude, I think.
Maybe that's why I was kind of lost in it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one question is just bringing back the idea of what are we to understand of one's ego, right? And for me, it's about, to the extent of my understanding, it's about the idea of attributing my actions or my supposed accomplishments to myself, right? And if I do this, then the extent of its own significance can only really lead to decay, or only to some sort of transience, right? It can only look to this world. It must only look to this world. I can't make it eternal in any way. And the other, it's saying, if concerning worship and servitude, which I think needs to be unpacked, must look to eternal life. In that if I don't attribute it to myself, then I am attributing it to one who is absolute and is not subject to my weaknesses, to the nature of this world. But also, I think my main question was, how can we put this within the context of what we've been speaking about so far?
So since the question is clear now, would you like to answer?
Or just any initial comments you have.
I don't know if I am able to answer the question, but maybe I can just share with you what I understood from the two paragraphs so far, based on maybe under the light of the question actually. So he talks about two faces of man. One looks to the ego, the other one looks to the servitude. So what is really ego in this context? And it seems like, to me, it is like there is some hinting to it in the second paragraph. When it says man, with his poverty and impotence, he's the mirror of an innumerable manifestation of the Creator. So maybe we can read this as that we have this phenomenon that we experience in ourselves, that we think that we independently exist. We have that perception or claim that we have this independent existence, and we are able to maintain our own existence. we have the power of choice. So you make the choices, and based on that, like we are able to control our own lives. But the author discusses like the man's like true nature in terms of like that claim and power of choice, but at the same time like being completely impotent and wretched, and what that really means to be a like mirror for the innumerable manifestation of the creator. And when it comes to like two different faces or two different aspects, on one side, having that claim that you independently exist and your existence doesn't depend on anything like else other than yourself, as opposed to having the like approach or attitude of like servitude or worship, realizing that yes, true, like it is true that you do have some sort like power of will to a certain extent, but your own existence doesn't depend on your own will. So your existence depends on something other than yourself. And everything that you experience in terms of the existence is nothing but the manifestation of the creator and the qualities of the creator that is being reflected on the mirror of your own ego. That's like a short summary of like how I would describe it, but I'm not sure if this is
No,
like
that makes
bringing
sense.
in more questions or if like make it more confusing. I don't know if it helps at all, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when I first read this, where it says looks to the life of the world of this world, my first question is, well, what is the life of this world? What are its qualities? What does that mean? What does this world represent to me? And I think it's somewhat, kind of elaborates upon it. But the primary idea I have is of eventual decay, of transience, things not being eternal. And just to bring it home to myself, what I was thinking of was, let's say I have to write an essay, right? As a student, I have to do this often. And so I write a paper and I submit it and give it to my professor. To an extent, if I attribute the completion of that essay to myself, all the words, all the ideas to myself fully, then it may temporarily, I think this side of it looks to my ego, right? It may temporarily appease me, say, oh, I did a great job, I came up with these wonderful arguments, wonderful ideas, but then at the same time, I claim self-dependency, right? And next time I have to write a paper, suddenly I'm in this, as they may call it, wretched position of having to again come up with ideas, again have to be this self-independent person who also produces, amazing ideas. Not that I actually do, but in that it puts me in a position of weakness, of fragility, of stress, of just, again, I think what it was talking about before of almost being a slave to everything else around me, right? But if I say that, if I almost link the qualities that have been given to me that allow me to write a paper to the one that created them, then in a way I'm acknowledging that I'm relying on one whose qualities are absolute, whose source is endless, and it takes me away from being in a position of full weakness or because I think that self-reliance, self-dependency that I at least find in myself, right, that Aishner finds, she likes it at first. I enjoy it. I'm like, yes, I'm so independent, etc. But at the same time, it puts this huge load of pressure onto myself. And I think it's saying that it can only be like a fast dying flame of a lifespan. If I attribute any quality I find in myself to myself, then I find that it's being taken away quickly. I'm getting older, my youth is being taken away from me. I'm not getting any smarter, all these things, all these different qualities. it puts me in this position of one whose capital is just constantly diminishing, and decaying and disappearing. And so, again, when I link that to the life of this world, it only points to definite annihilation. But I can go on and on, so anyone please chip in.
I think if you didn't have the ego, or you can call it self too,
Mm-hmm.
if you didn't have the self, or if you were not giving the self and the consciousness of it, then there would be no difference between me and this like chair. I wouldn't be able to distinguish myself from the chair, or from the carpet, or from the tree out there. You wouldn't like draw a boundary yourself as an entity, and you wouldn't be able to unconscious of your own existence, in other words.
Right, that's consciousness.
Yeah.
Right.
Together with consciousness though, that whatever that is called self or ego,
Mm-hmm.
that is also given for the purpose that so you can draw some sort of borders for yourself to identify yourself as an entity, as a human being in the creation. So that's why it is something very essential. Otherwise, you wouldn't even speak of the existence, because you wouldn't be aware of your own existence.
Mm-hmm.
But together with this, you have the trick of falling into the trap that since you are aware of your own existence, having the illusion that your existence is from itself and doesn't depend on anything else. And that's where the two aspects comes into play. One, you can rely on yourself and have the illusion that you have all the whatever the qualities you think of, like smartness, beauty, or anything that you may think of. You may think that all those qualities are from yourself, from your own being. Or you can take the self as a mirror, all the creator who is reflecting those qualities in that mirror, and through your own free will, taking the position of worshipper. And anytime, for example, you struggle with writing an essay, and it's not coming from you, you just take the position of making dua and a prayer to the giver, the maker or creator of those qualities, for you to make it or to write it. So then that brings up another dimension into your life, that you have this relationship, constant relationship with the creator in each and every single moment. This is the main purpose, as far as I understand, this is the main purpose of these readings, or writings that Nursi wrote, and that's my main purpose of this reading, to bring that consciousness into my life all the time, because as soon as I go out of this discussion, I fall into that heedlessness again.
Hassan was raising hand.
Okay, so Qasim can go first.
No, please go ahead.
Qasim can go after.
Okay, so practically, just to make more sense of these two paragraphs, it applies to me, to anyone. So I just sometimes do this with other people since it's easier. So I ask the question, what is your purpose of life? What do you expect out of your life? And actually last week after this discussion, we were having such a conversation with a friend. Time to time we ask these questions to ourselves, to other people. And the response is generally being, I want to graduate from this and leave some mark or achieve something and be useful for society, be useful for Muslims.
Immortal.
Well,
in some sort of
we don't call it like that. I'm trying to speak in the practical terms that we use. Or let's say form the family and have children which are going to be useful for the Muslim Ummah. I mean, these sort of things that we come up with. So, but in here, I don't know where this sort of wording falls into it in terms of these two categories. And if we go to, let's say, a secular world, things are going to be not much different. It's going to be trying to find a cure for such and such sickness, or this sort of things, as if we are trying to build up the world. But in the first phase, as he describes, the man looks very wretched, he says. You don't have anything but just a glimpse of, if you like, will. Just a little bit of, a little bit of choice, a very fast dying flame of life. I mean, these sort of things that we have. So when we ask the question, what's my purpose of life? Our answers to this question mainly goes into this very wretched aspect of me. So how much are they attainable really then, if this is my purpose of life? So making it sound like more religious doesn't solve the problem. Saying that I'm going to become a famous, professor and represent Muslims in the society by having this good character, and just maybe we are covering it. I mean, at least I am covering it up as I say such stuff.
But I'm going to attain that thing through the secular means.
Yeah.
With the secular mindset.
So I guess it's. It applies to me with anything. Maybe I might be saying that, okay, I'm going to make more discussions so that I'm going to do this and that, but it applies to, all of us have a share in that, but this mostly falls into the first category as far as I can see. But he's saying that in this aspect, we are quite wretched. But when it comes to the second one, he's as if mocking us, saying that you are good in one thing in which, practically speaking, you are like a black hole. You're just so dark, no light within you. You're needy. You're in one job, you are perfect. You're professional. And it's being a, if you like, miserable beggar, in a sense. But when I ask question to myself or anyone, what is your purpose of life? It's not being like, I am trying to recognize my neediness to its ultimate degree. This is personally never my purpose of life. So I guess practically, maybe if we look at such two aspects in my personal life in this practical background, it might make more sense.
I think even in responses to that question, right, what is the purpose of my life? Responses like wanting to help others, wanting to do all these different humanitarian causes, part of their underlying thought is not linking where these desires or wants are coming from, right? What quality they're coming from and why this quality actually exists. It's coming from perhaps not questioning the root of it and just focusing on the thing itself. But before I say anything else, Qasim, you want to say something, I think?
Yeah, I'm trying to think where to begin. So I had 3 points that I wanted to, I guess, make, as well as they're kind of, in a way, questions open to discussion. So first was to Yusuf's point of, I guess, life and one wanting to install a purpose in life. I find that statement to be very challenging as well, because I think it kind of comes with a preconceived notion of that life in its existence was given to me almost as if without a purpose to begin with. And I know that maybe that's not what's being implied, but sometimes when I ask myself the question, what is the purpose of life what is the purpose that I want to provide my life with? That question in itself to me seems to be, taking life for granted, in the sense that as if life was given to me without a purpose, and it's left up to me to decide what that purpose should be. And I know that that's probably separately, I guess separate from the topic that we're discussing, but I just wanted to say that. The second point that a tool that allows me through, I guess, attributing things to myself through, sorry, I can hear myself. Yes, so through or by trying to attribute things to myself, I realize that that I do not attain that level of satisfaction or certainty, and that falls short. And once it does, it actually becomes a mean of questioning further that, okay, clearly my ego, which, tends to find things to attribute to itself, to say like, I did this, or, I was the reason for, I guess, anything, that once that falls short, that becomes a means to question, okay, clearly it isn't me. Then what is it? And that brings me to my third point, which is in the last line of the last sentence of the first paragraph, where it says, together with this, he is one delicate. And I want to put the emphasis on the word is, because personally, from my experience, when I'm using my ego, or when I'm being egoistical, I don't feel that way. I feel the exact opposite. I feel that I am in power. I feel that I am strong. I feel that I am in control. But that doesn't change the reality, which is the is part, that, again, eventually that falls short. And then comes the ultimate realization to say, okay, you know what? I am weak. I am delicate. I'm not in control. So just wanted to say that.
I have a quick comment as well. I guess in relation to Qasim's second point, and also what Osman was saying before. I was thinking about how, what about it is it about the ego that makes it possible to attribute anything to something else? And I was thinking about the I, as in I am happy, or I am doing X, Y, or Z. And perhaps this has been already touched upon, and maybe I'm just repeating the same thing again. But I was thinking about how by saying I am doing something or I am something, in that sentence, I attribute something to something else. The I is a pronoun, so it makes there's an actor in that sentence, and an actor necessitates a consciousness and a will. So I guess in relation to these two paragraphs that we've read, the act, it's a matter of how exactly we use that I, right? Because the I is, I guess perhaps one way of thinking about it is the I is the ability to attribute a quality to something. And if I could not say I am running or I am sitting or something, then I could not have been able to attribute anything to anything. So in one way, I attribute things to themselves, which would be, the concerning his ego looks to the life of this world, and the other one attributing it to something beyond its apparent physical aspect of it, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. That definitely makes sense. Just one quick comment to Qasim's first point. I think you're right about the idea that there's a preconceived notion embedded in the idea of, determining what one's life purpose should be. And I think that stems to the idea of, secular materialism, honestly, that dictates that, man is the sum of his actions, and that you have to determine your own purpose in life. And so it puts this almost responsibility, if you will, or agency of directing one's own life, this independency So I think you're correct about that. And I had another question, if no one else has any other comments, about how, the author here is saying that if I attribute it to myself, right, then things will just decay, will die, basically I'll be wretched, everything will be horrible, I'll never be fully satisfied. But that if suddenly I turn it towards worship and servitude to God, then I have importance, I have significance. And I just wanted to kind of discuss this more further in depth of why this is so.
Is your question?
I think Faraz has something to say.
Yeah.
So,
But I'm late, so I feel bad that I...
no, please. As moderator, I give you full leverage and power. Talk.
So, I don't know even where to begin, but I think when you said that it connects to something that I was thinking, but so when I say all this value or the wretchedness and something, so I have to ask myself, in whose eyes? In Nursi's eyes? Or in society's eyes this will happen? Or who will feel this way? Who will experience this? Who am I going to count on this, like what Nursi is saying? How am I going to, or who is going to experience this? So we shouldn't forget this aspect. So, I have to ask myself, is it wretched? Does it make me wretched in my eyes to think that I have life that I think is mine and I'm losing it? I'm going to lose it. Who has anything to lose or gain in this matter? So I think it's very plain. The answer is just a rhetorical question simply because we forget it, but it's very plain. It's my well-being or my unwell-being at stake. I have to bring myself to the question, right? If I just discuss, Lucy talks about wretchedness and eternity, and it is somebody's eternity and somebody's wretchedness, yeah? Then, of course, it's like, let me analyze it and see for someone, as if that doesn't make any sense, it's just, but, when I feel the first time, and again, it depends on how you're feeling, but you say like worship and servitude looks to eternal life. That phrase should do something, do you want eternal life? And if you think it is possible, is it not a matter of unbelievable joy or unfathomable joy? What would it feel like for me that I have eternal life? I don't believe it, because if I think about it, it just should give me goosebumps at least just make me feel like I am a candidate for eternity. And so what kind of eternity? With everything in its perfect level. So there is something called, joy, or the gratitude, however you want to say it. But I think if I look to just my life, just to myself and everything that I love, everything that I value, and I really think about, how shall I? And I think that's one of the things we do. We are so afraid because we think of the language of self. We think selfish. It's very selfish of me. I speak to people, they say, it's very selfish of me to think about my own needs. What about other people's needs? It's a real, people can't think of, out of their goodness of their heart. I don't want to be strong, but misuse of the goodness of their heart without realizing, they think it's very selfish of me to think about my eternal life. So selfish. They don't want to go there. They don't want to say, it's about me. First and foremost, I need. What am I going to do to the world? I just project my own
anxieties and depressions to the world. So I have to first solve my problem. It's for selfish. It's a language of what you call secular materialism or whatever. Although I have a soft corner for secularism in some way, and something to do. Responsibility is an interesting. The individual responsibility gets highlighted. That got out of view in traditional religious thinking. It became, I just follow everyone. You don't have to individual responsibility for confirming or rejecting something. Anyway, that's different. But I think we have to come to ourselves, and I have to say that this eternal life, either he doesn't mean it, or either this phrase doesn't mean anything. But if it means anything, then I have to try to see it is my wretchedness and my eternity at stake for me, is it? So I think that's really important. Like I have to I shouldn't hesitate. No, it's so selfish of me. There's so many people here. I start thinking about my need and my joy and my sadness. What is maybe Aisha is feeling not so bad, and I should sit here and say, I'm so perfectly happy. Maybe she'll feel like, bad. I shouldn't make her feel bad. So I should suppress my happiness. That's how we operate in the world. That's how I feel. I can't express my real happiness because I think people will get depressed that he's so happy we're not. Or that you think there's actually, you found eternal life? They say, you're mad. It's not possible. So we have to acknowledge the reality. So I have to, in that language, I have to say, I am the most selfish person in the world. My Creator asked me to be accountable for myself. I have to be the most selfish. But you understand self of selfish as just a self. I understand that's purpose in creation. That's what it is. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just read the word eternal life and I'm thinking, eternal life? I want it.
No, I think the point you raised, I think, really resonates with me in terms of, asking the question like, who in whose eyes am I going to be wretched, right? Because I, first and foremost, have a tendency to kind of externalize myself from the text even, reduce it to theoretical brain exercises, and not even acknowledge what's at stake the author is talking about, right? Like eternity. For me, it's like, oh yeah, eternity, God, just turn to worship. So I think it's important, for myself at least, to just keep that in mind and ask myself if I actually experience this, not in just some grand action, but when I'm doing the most basic of things, like cleaning the house or something, or just walking outside in the park, if I experience what Nursi is saying, when I ascribe things to themselves or to my ego, and otherwise. But I think somebody online wanted to speak and I cut them off, so I'll turn back to them.
Arun, do you want to say something? Otherwise, I would. Yeah.
Okay, so nobody wants to say something.
May I say something?
Oh yes.
I want to say something.
Oh, go ahead, Emily. Sorry.
Okay, question. So the paragraph begins with the statement, man has two faces. My question to everyone is, how is it, what is the thought or reflection process that led author to make this statement? In other words, how exactly someone can, think about their lives, existence, and experiences and come to the conclusion, hey, yeah, I got two faces. I'm really curious about this because on the surface level, it looks a little bit challenging, at least to me.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay. That's a nice coincidence. Is it coincidence what word we use in this case, Yusuf?
There are no coincidences.
Yes, that's the reason I asked him. There's a special word for it. Anyway, I was planning to speak just about this, what Ant asked. I was asking the same question to myself when Faraz was talking about, do I experience that way or do I need the eternal life? So I was trying to see these two faces, and to me it seems that this is how I experience, how I live life. Like from one aspect, I see great things happening around me. Like they happens all the time. I see people saving lives. Right? I see people building like amazing machineries, doing amazing things. Like I see them with my own eyes. I see someone finding an equation which explains like almost everything. I see someone writing a poem, like touching to my emotions, other emotions. I see them like all these great things happening. I see that there is a huge power manifested. Like I see, we've been talking about the wind. I see the wind like shaking the trees, such a big power. I see that if someone like Faraz, right, just a single man, can destroy a planet, like he has such a capacity, right? He can build a weapon which can destroy the planet, like not only figuratively speaking, he can, right? I see that. I see even like humanity can generate a black hole which can destroy the whole universe. So I guess this great importance or great power, great creativity is there somehow, like I experience it. But at the same time, when I look at myself, or when I look at the people, as people, not as what they manifest, what they can do or cannot do, but as what they are, as I look at myself as what I am, I don't see any trace of this power or creativity or importance. I don't see it there. Like when I try to find it, it's not there. All I can find, as author says, is a wheel, which a tiny, like I can just one thing, and that's all. It stops there. I don't even know how to utilize this wheel. I don't even know how to realize what I want. I see some power there, but when I try to describe it, all I find is it's kind of, I have power to acquire something. Like if something is given to me, I can accept this. Or I see my life, as author says, it's just like a fast dying flame. Like it's not just a flame, this is what I see when I look at myself. I was 5 years old, like just a blink eye ago. So it's so clear, right? My memories. And I'm approaching to death so quickly. But at the same time, as I said at the beginning, like my life is so important, it can consume all lives in the universe. Or I can bring lives into existence. So I guess these two aspects are really there. Like this is how I experience. Especially if you are surrounded with people who create things, at least apparently, seemingly. You see this contrast all the time. one aspect is so creative, one aspect is so weak, impotence. So at least to me, this is not just a bold claim, but this is something I can really validate.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you. That's very good. So I was also thinking how I was reflecting on this a little bit on how we have two faces, and I think it's a very good. It's like how we say about the worldview we have. So these two faces or aspects, they portray like what kind of a view we establish in our lives in this world. And I was also thinking, well, if let's say if I didn't have the ego in myself, which is not possible because that's the way a human being is, right? Then I would never understand, never be able to make the comparison or see that there are these two aspects of things. So I'm really I see this as a very positive thing that, there is this thing called ego in every human being, because that helps us differentiate the other aspect, if I may say. And then I was thinking on how I utilize this ego of mine. Mostly it is towards the life of this world. Because if I have the other view of realizing that about the eternal life and my existence for forever being secure, then this ego does not really work there, because it's always for the immediate, result within something within this world that I use that in. And the author, I see that puts it really very, I guess he's still very generous in saying that you have a small power, you have some partial power of choice. Because really, to be honest with you, I don't, if we realize with the second aspect, the second phase, there is, because everything is given to us, right? We are set free to use it, but it is not like we have it. We don't own that thing. And again, if we realize the second aspect, again, to comparing it to the first aspect, I can see that how my life, like Berkan was describing, how it becomes a fast dying flame. But if I'm living with the first aspect of the ego, and I'm always worried about things going around and don't see what is reflected, or what that these things that are happening, or the events I'm going through, are all acting as a mirror and are purposeful and are meaningful and are a way for me to come to the second aspect, then I will be lost in that particular first aspect. And that's how all this delicate, weak, decaying small body comes into the picture. But the point I wanted to make was this two faces is a beautiful thing for me. That's how I see it, because that allows me to work on the second phase and establish that particular view.
Thank you both. I think Faraz wants to say something.
So Amin's question, I guess just adding, maybe saying the same thing what was said, but in my language, in this language that comes to my mind. What is the thought process Amin said, whereby one can get to this? So one can get to an inkling of this, that it should be this way. And then, of course, to me, revelation comes and confirms this, that this is the case, and I say yes. But the way I experience it at the level of my emotions is the distance between what is and what ought to be. I don't know, it's a maybe philosophical way of putting it, but you'll understand. But so what is and what ought to be. So what is that there is poverty in the world. Some people are poor, some people have physical illnesses, etc. What ought to be in my human, but humanity says there ought to be no suffering. Nobody should suffer. There ought to be no poverty. There ought to be no injustice. So in whatever level we can think of this, so the two faces of me appear to me first in the gap between what I experience and my dissatisfactions with it, you want to call it, or the distance between the gap between what I feel it should be or it should be like. In fact, I'm given to feel that way. It should be like, and what actually it is. So I find there is a dichotomy. There's a two. The part of me wants it to be this way, but part of me knows it is not this way, it is this way. And now, also, I think a lot of, in fact, all I would say human thought is trying to figure out this dilemma of, I want this to be real, for example, but if I really think about it, it doesn't seem to be real because it is so transient. I want it to be real, but so part of me wants it to be real, but part of me knows it's not real. So what is it? I want to think that I know what these things are. But when I really ask myself, do I really know what beauty is? And I say, but how do I know? How do I see something and say it's beautiful? How do I know beauty? I don't know. But I want to know. I want to be able to say I know it, but I don't. So at any level you want to think of this, there's a gap between what I find to be the case and what I also find in myself wanting to be the case. And that is one way of saying the two-phased thought process, that if I contemplate that gap in different aspects of my life, what is and what ought to be, I can come to the position and say, I have two faces. One face that just looks at the thing as what I see, and another face that says, it ought to be like this, or it ought to be whatever. So,
can I make definition? Just something like, actually it's going to be addition to what you said. Just a reminder, so we are studying the verse of a man has been created in the best form, then was sent down to the lowest of the low. So Creator is speaking to man and explaining to him what his reality is in this verse, right? And then we should take that verse and look into ourselves and see what that verse refers to in man's nature, bring that out and confirm that, it speaks to that nature of me. I think that's what Nursi does here. But of course, at individual level, I don't know how successful I am speaking for myself to be able to really put that in practice. But that is seems like that is the process that he has been going through. So it is not just, there's an internal reflection, thinking your own being, but at the same time, there is this revelation actually teaching you who you really are. And when you put them together, I think this is the outcome.
Thank you. Would anyone online like to comment, or if anyone has a question, please feel free to speak up. If not, yes.
To Faraz and what he said, it might be slightly off topic, but it's something I've been curious about. You're talking about how I see something how it is, and then because it's not how it ought to be in my imagination, in my mind, then I think, okay, then something like that must exist. But how far can we go with this logic? Because for example, I could say, I see that in the Quran it writes that people will be punished, but then I can make something like, God has to be the most merciful, so he ought to not punish anyone actually. He needs to forgive everyone, and that maybe the things in the Quran are just metaphors, or they're just, I don't know, trying to scare me, but in reality it's not going to happen. How far can I go with this logic? If that makes sense, I should.
I think that also requires the understanding terms such as what punishment is. So if we inject our own understanding of what punishment is and then attribute that to be something coming from God, such as I guess perhaps, let's say my definition of punishment is physical, in a physical form. And then I'm injecting my understanding of that punishment and saying, oh, God wants me to, then punish someone. I think that isn't the right way to go about it. Is these things perhaps require further understanding of what punishment might mean.
To answer that question, like you said, I'm not sure, I don't know if people can hear me, but I'm it's probably a bit off topic, but when as Nursi elaborates in his text, the way to read the Quran is to personalize it. It's not to take the Quran for what it says and somehow externally apply that to the speaker, saying he must do this or he must do that. Rather, does one see the effect of punishment from denial within one's own life and the effect of mercy or manifestation of mercy with belief within one's life through belief. As Norsi says, using those two faces, the ego and the worshipping aspect of man that looks to eternal life. In those two things is punishment and mercy, respectively. So in other words, the speaker is as merciful as man sees mercy within his life, because he has the capacity to, not the capacity, but the potentiality to exhibit, demonstrate, and experience infinite mercy, and likewise the potentiality to exhibit infinite punishment, in as much as he looks to things for their own sake with the ego, or looks to this world as being satisfactory to one's humanity, even though it's contradictory to one's infinite needs. So one cannot speak about mercy and wrath or punishment independent of one's own experience. They don't exist externally, so to speak, independent of one's perspective of the universe. That's, in a sense, taking the perspective or position of the creator. One can only speak from their own position, their own perspective.
And also, like, with the same logic, you can say that, like, there is injustice. So with the same logic, you can say that there is injustice, so there ought to be justice or just creator, and a place where, like, there will be fully justice, like, manifested.
So you can't say that there ought to be something, then, ever, because then you're putting yourself in the place of a creator and saying it should be like this.
I think
that's just speaking from your own needs. I think that's what, at least that's what I understood from Farah's comments, that, like, from your own innate, like, desire, that it is there.
But I need God to be merciful too.
For.
I need God to be so merciful that He doesn't punish. I need that in my needs.
I think what I understood from Faraz's comment was, and this kind of was talked about slightly in another discussion, was about how, I want things basically to be perfect, right? I don't want there to be suffering, and I want God to act in the perfect way, in the perfect balance, with no flaws. And at least when I experience the world around me, I don't see balance, I don't see perfection, I see constant destruction by other humans, I see suffering, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But this dichotomy that he was talking about, someone in another discussion circle once called it a beautiful contradiction, right? Because I see what is and what I think, or I have the capacity to imagine what ought to be, what it should be like. And because of this contradiction, I can at least conclude that that I am created in a way to not want things to be as they are. And so I can at least deduce in some respects that I am not created for to be satisfied in a world that is like this, that is transient. And so my needs point to something that is not transient, that is not unsatisfactory. And because of this contradiction, I am pushed and impelled to investigate and search for an answer of why this should be so, or why this is like this. Because if everything was fully satisfactory, and I don't know if this fully answers your question in any respects, but I'm kind of sharing my thoughts on it. If everything was fully satisfactory, then I wouldn't feel any the need for any sort of questioning, and I would just be fully content with things as they are. Can you see that again?
If that was the case, then you wouldn't like feel the need of like speaking like of God or any kind of
sure, yeah.
like afterlife or eternity and all.
Right. So I think for me at least, to my understanding, the current state of affairs pushes me to kind of question and seek beyond what meaning the things themselves are pointing towards and what they actually are indicating towards, what the content of things happening actually hold. But yeah. Would anyone else like to say anything? Anyone online? Anyone wants to speak?
I think very shortly, I wanted to add, again, I guess going along the lines of like redefining what we accept as punishment, because I was thinking sometimes if there's an injustice, right, the punishment to that injustice is a mercy, is a compassion that I can experience, that I do experience. So the lack of punishment, quote unquote, it's all in air quotes, punishment, then for me, I guess, equates to a lack of justice. And even in that punishment is mercy. So that punishment becomes beautiful to me as well. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
I just wanted to add, kind of tying Osman's point and Qasim's point. I think the understanding of punishment also needs to be addressed, or mercy. What does it fundamentally mean? Because even, for example, in an extreme sense, or the most remarkable example would be, somebody being, let's say, killed or harmed unjustly. There is no amount of justice that could be done that can resurrect or return the situation to what it was. Hence why, as Osman says, the need of an afterlife. It's not possible. Even if someone were to exact justice on that individual, it does not rectify the situation completely. Even then, man is still in need of the perfection of his being, whether physically or emotionally. Those things can never be fixed. So in that regard, one's understanding of, mercy then also changes, because the mercy is not in justice in and of itself that one receives in this world. It's knowing that justice can only be provided by an all just one, the creator of the universe. And that's really what man is fundamentally in need of, is this connection. In a sense, you could say that seeking justice for justice sake is almost egocentric.
I think the other thing, like when we talk about punishment or wrath, we take that like as an opposing quality to mercy and justice and compassion. But I'm not really sure if that is really the case. To me, I think the magnitude of the wrath comes from the magnitude of the compassion of the Creator. In other words, like I think you would like really relate to this better when you become a parent. As if I had like years of like parenting.
Experienced father.
So when you do like react in a certain way that may seem very like harsh towards your child, but in reality that may be because of the compassion and mercy and love that you have for your child, that you don't want the child to get into a greater danger. So you cannot really like say that like the parent is acting out of like being an evil person. It may be, especially like you can observe that with like moms, it may be perfectly out of like the tremendous like compassion. So like if you can take this analogy and apply it to the creator, I really don't see like any difference between the two.
But that's exactly why, and I guess the topic's kind of gone off topic, but that's exactly why when I think of punishment or this Jahannam, this hellfire, that's when I think, you know, he's my creator. Just you said a parent does something that looks harsh to the child, but in reality it's good for the child. So when I think of hellfire, the idea that comes to mind, you know, it looks harsh to me, but somehow there's some mercy behind that. Almost.
But like when creator speaks to you that there is a hellfire, if you take this direction, this is where you're going to end up with. And then he comes back to you like with this like almost like threatening like verses saying that don't take that path. That again, that's out of like the mercy of the creator that he has for you, that he doesn't want you to take that path. And he doesn't want you to punish yourself, you yourself, by taking that path. So like, I think it's just really like it depends on how we like view this situation, like, and what is the main motivation of the creator to do that.
May I say something?
Yes.
What Osman said reminded me the original verse, what we are discussing here. We have created man in the best form and then sent him down to the lowest of the low. And again, the paragraph that we just studying, Nursi says, in respect of second phase and especially his impotence and poverty, which are turned towards worship, man has truly great breadth, vast importance. So just like in the verse, best form, lowest of the low. Two extremes, two, let's say, opposing sides coming together, almost in a contradictory way, coming together. And then here, author says, poverty and impotence, importance and great breadth, right? Two opposite things. Like mercy, pain, punishment. So your importance coming from your impotence. You can have the taste of a food. Why? Because you are hungry. If you are not hungry, you cannot enjoy the taste. You cannot enjoy the food. But this is how we live the life. Like, I'm not trying to define some rules that you have to follow. This is what I am. So these two phases that we've been talking from the beginning, like I see all this beauty, I see all this power, all these infinite manifestations taking place in front of my eyes. At the same time, I experience my impotence. So system, somehow, like from the initial point of view, is perfectly designed that I cannot attribute anything to myself. Because when I try to do it, all I see there is impotence. I know that it's not me. So it's perfectly designed. Whenever I forget my impotence, there is always something to remind me. Because you are impotent. What you see as a beauty here, it's not yours. When I enjoy something, just in the moment of enjoyment, there is a reminder, you will lose it. Like your child, your lovely child, she will become a young adult soon. You will lose her. Reminder is always there. Your impotence is always there. When you enjoy something like punishment, the way you experience, I'm not talking about an external punishment. What is inside you, the feeling you have, it's there. So that you cannot attribute to yourself. So another thing I really like this contrast, impotence and importance. Like such a beautiful definition. Like things that you take as impotence, weakness, they actually correspond to some potentialities, some capacities. Like you are in need of speaking, you are in need of conveying your understanding because you have a capacity to experience the wisdom. Otherwise, you wouldn't have this need. So every need, every weakness you have corresponds to something that you can manifest. Like you are in need of mercy because you can manifest mercy. You can experience mercy. So all the things that you think as weakness or punishment or pain or suffering, every negative connotations, they correspond to something beautiful, something powerful. Right? You are in pain of separation because there is something which connects everything. You are pain of, or you are scared, or you have the anxiety of death because there is an eternal life. So death is there, or this anxiety is there to tell you about your capacity, the potentiality to have the infinite life. So again, going back to text, your importance comes from your impotence.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's going to be very short. Going back to what you said, we have, I don't think the opposite of rahmah, marhamah, mercy is not punishment. It's justice. You know, you enter heaven because God is merciful, and you enter hell because God is just. So I don't think we should think those are the opposites. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
I think what can be said is, man is in need of eternal well-being that is seen as not only as a merciful gift, the truth, or the Quranic message is seen as a gift, but a just gift in accordance with how man is made, and that his quote-unquote punishment is his own doing. It's not out of, it is, as Osman said, it's not because he desires it from man, it's because man brings it upon himself. He is unjust to himself, and thus brings his punishment, his own punishment upon himself. In a sense, as this goes, brings in other, aspects of belief, but there is no evil. Evil is only brought upon by man by his own state.
I think Qasim had his hand raised at one point. If you still have something to say, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I I basically wanted to discuss this point where it's a third last line on the second paragraph where it says, so that he can be an extensive mirror containing innumerable manifestations. And I was trying to find, I guess, a real life, example or an analogy where I could kind of tie these two paragraphs together and make sense of it. And, I ended up using an actual mirror as an example. And it's interesting because a mirror, I guess, in its nature and its quality of creation is very different, extremely different, or perhaps totally different from what it reflects. And I feel like a good analogy is like if a mirror became conscious of its existence and starts to attribute everything that's reflected in the mirror to itself, to, I guess, everything that it contains, and emphasis on the word contains because it's different from, I guess, being. And I guess, again, that logic falls short if the mirror was to make that claim that everything that's reflected in me is within me, or I guess is of myself or from myself. Yet what's, again, beautiful about the second paragraph is that what the mirror reflects is completely different from the nature of the mirror itself. So while we're extremely, quote unquote, impotent, and like as the paragraph describes further, like in poverty, what we reflect does not need to be of the same nature. It can be something completely different. Thank you.
I think Faraz has something to say. No, please.
Is nobody before that?
No, I think you're.
So I am just thinking to myself, mirror is a metaphor we use a lot, or the author uses and many people use. And first of all, we have to remember it's a metaphor. So we shouldn't get stuck in the metaphor, and metaphor refers to something. So if somebody were to ask me, for example, on the street, have you achieved your purpose in life? And if I said, yes, and what was it? I'm a mirror to divine names. And somebody said, and that you find satisfied? He says, yes, I'm a mirror to divine names. So if I just said I'm a mirror to divine names, clearly I'm using a metaphor. I have to have a meaning for it. So I shouldn't just say by saying mirror to divine names, I've actually accomplished something. I haven't. But so when I say mirror, I say that to say something else. Metaphor. I'm using the metaphor to say something, so we shouldn't just lose sight of
the truth of
that. What does it refer to that satisfies? Just calling myself a mirror of divine names is not satisfactory because what it refers to satisfies. I don't know if I made sense, but so when you say an extensive mirror, we don't have to write this minute, go into that discussion, but it's just important. It's okay for us to feel a little bit in need of something more to be said about it. That is fine, because that's not discussed here, but I just think that I need to keep in mind that here, because he's making a different point, that's not elaborated, but I need to be aware that.
Can I attempt to give an example, like what to say and tie it like to Abdurrahman's questions? Like I will just give it a try. So like I feel like I may be wrong. When we take the position of like whatever is like reflected on that mirror, when we assume all those qualities and attribute it to ourselves, then we end up with a situation that, like, for example, we experience injustice that takes place in this, like, on Earth, right? And we have this also, like, the sympathy for the people, and feel bad, like, about the situation that people are going through. And then, like, out of the compassion that we experience, we start, like, because we attribute the compassion to ourselves, in other words, like, whatever reflected in the mirror, we assume those. Then, as if we have to write, then we say, okay, how is it, like, that possible that God is so merciful that He allows this to happen? Or how is it so merciful that He punishes? And we forget the fact that at the first place, the compassion that you are experiencing yourself is not from the mirror itself. It is just a mere reflection of the compassion of the Creator. And to be able to reach that understanding, what I understand from what you said for us, if I can reach that understanding and keep that consciousness alive, then that mirror analogy becomes something livable. And this is the truth of the metaphor for me. And if I can put that, like, consciousness in practice in, like, everyday life, then I'm just thinking or imagining that it would be quite, like, different life than what I go through on day-to-day basis. Then probably I would come to a point that I wouldn't even bother to ask that question at the first place if I was able to practice.
Anyone online have
That
comments?
means you shouldn't ask that kind of questions. It's haram.
Just one thing, or two things. Yeah, I mean, as Osman said, the key is consciousness. As for us, it's not just to be a mirror, but to be a conscious mirror. That is, to me, what is satisfactory, because a mirror in and of itself reflects, but the satisfaction is in knowing that it reflects, or being aware or cognizant that you are a mirror, a reflection of, as Norsi says, an all-powerful and compassionate one, all generous, all rich one, who is the only one that can satisfy your needs, and you know that by being a mirror. So that was one thing, and the second thing is, I think this section in general, I mean, as was already probably stated, is, what makes man man? Is he his body, or is he something more than that, a spirit? And in this entire second remark, Nursi makes it very clear that man is something more than what he appears to be. And I think it's, at least, it's kind of interesting, or not really a coincidence, that we're reading this, because, I mean, atheism or secularism is quite prevalent today and reduces man to his body. But when you think about it, one's body is simply a collection of atoms, particles, cells that don't really mean anything in and of themselves, and yet that collection or composite can mean something, or can have feelings or hopes or aspirations and wishes, and it can be conscious or aware of its own self. And it's interesting how people, wish, even those who are what we consider the most intelligent people, are very obstinate in denying this. This seed, or as he says, immaterial seed within man's being, his spirit. So I found how Nursi describes man very interesting.
Thank you for that. Yes, please.
Since he asked what makes a man a man, and as a man, I have to answer that.
We will see after you get married.
Joke aside, so in this paragraph, fold She says, for the all-wise creator has included in man's nature an infinitely vast impotence and boundless huge poverty. So I don't know, I might be fooling myself, just taking everything from an optimistic view, but when he speaks of poverty, it reminds me that to speak of poverty, you first accept the existence of a treasure. Like if there is no, just as an example, if there is no money, no power to buy something, like you cannot speak of poverty. Yes, like for instance, you can't speak of a poor rock, right? A rock cannot be poor rock, like it's just a rock. But a human being can be poor. Like I can feel poverty. And the treasure, I don't know if the treasure is the right word to satisfy this poverty, whatever it is. And this treasure is not also something external. It's not, I have the poverty and somewhere there's a money. But I can also experience, I can also feel, or I can also, let's say, to touch this treasure. And he says, this is in my nature, it's something given. So what I'm trying to say is when I read about poverty, when he says, or when Creator in the Quran says in the Revelation, like I gave you in your nature this poverty, it reminds me, it tells me that this is so beautiful. That means I'm given the, not pleasure, but what's the word? Priority privilege. I am given the privilege of experience the treasure. That's what poverty means. Right? So this is how I understand this mirror and something. Like this is something I can get the pleasure, right? I can satisfy. It means Creator gave me the privilege of experience His treasures. I am so poor. That's what I understand. And when I take it that way, it becomes something, satisfiable. Like I said, yes, I am poor. Because I know, this is my reality. I don't have these treasures in me. That's something I know already. I cannot deny. But at the same time, I'm not like a rock. The rock doesn't have the treasures, but it cannot be poor as well. I don't have the treasure, this is my reality, but I feel the poverty. Meaning I have this capacity to experience the treasure. I am privileged, I'm not something, abundant. He's given me something. Again, like a pain, punishment, or again, whatever negative thing you take. If you can feel it, that means you have the privilege. If you are in need of mercy, if you are in pain of lack of mercy, that means you are given the privilege to experience the mercy. You use this privilege or not, this is something else. But you have this privilege because you feel the poverty. This is your importance. This is you have the high privilege. Again, I don't know the word, better word.
I think these two paragraphs, and based on what you said, it, as far as I understood, it is another way of looking at man's nature and understanding the verse when he says, man is created in the best form. What does that mean? We talked about this when we started the first time studying this. So best form for what? When you like think about like man's nature as he described in the first paragraph, we are constantly like aging and like going towards that, like, and one day you will be decaying. So like also thinking about the first remark, like having all those like innumerable desires and needs, but at the same time everything like not having any control over things in terms of like your own free will. And also like when you wanted to like provide those needs and wants for yourself, you find yourself in a position that like you're almost nothing. So that makes the man in a perfect like best form to get to know the creator with all his like qualities. As Qasim was saying, like if we can again go back to the mirror analogy, if we can see ourselves as a mirror, that is only the reflecting the manifestation, the qualities of the creator, and that's only possible understanding like your own impotence and poverty in terms of like existence and creation. But it's like almost like what do you call it, inversely proportionate. Like the more you understand about your own like infinite and power, like impotence and poverty, the more you will understand and rely on the absolute power and mercy.
Yeah. As long as belief, it's that perspective.
Yeah. So like that is like what the verse is talking about in terms of being created in the best form, because this is the best form to practice that like belief or like getting to know the creator. So like another like way of like looking at what you
yes, and about. I have this privilege of knowing my creator with all his names.
That privilege comes from like, so like as much as you get to know him, you like raised to a position that like you are a worshipper of the creator. Even though he says servitude here, you don't really serve God. Like actually you are serving yourself as far as I understand. Because by getting to know the creator, it is true that you're glorifying through your own impotence, you're glorifying the beautiful attributes of the creator, but at the same time you are serving to yourself because you are the one in need of that, like having that understanding and relying on it like absolute power and most merciful one.
Anyone online have any comments or thoughts they'd like to share?
Yeah, it's in a sense this sort of reflection, this conscious reflection, is in and of itself the worshipful, the worshiping aspect of man, because it itself is worship, and I don't know. I agree with Osman. I don't know what it says in Turkish, servitude to God, because in a sense, no contingent being can serve an absolute one. Rather, one is being served by him by being provided with such innumerable bounties and pleasures. And the last thing I wanted to say was, after one realizes this, it's really impossible for one to do anything but worship and in the physical sense prostrate before the creator of the universe. One doesn't need to be told to do that. It's already within man to do so innately, that he wishes to do so. That's why Nursi here never says that you must do it. Rather, it's already there, built in, programmed in within man. He just has to cultivate and discover and cultivate that aspect of his being.
If no one else has any comments, I think we should read a little bit more, because it seems to be on the same line of what everyone else is talking about. Indeed, man resembles a seed. This seed has been given significant immaterial numbers by divine power and a subtle, valuable program by divine determining, so that it may work beneath the ground and emerging from that narrow world, enter the broad world of the air, and asking its creator with the tongue of its disposition to be a tree, find a perfection worthy of it. Man resembles a seed. This seed has been given significant immaterial numbers by divine power and a subtle, valuable program by divine determining, so that it may work beneath the ground and emerging from that narrow world, enter the broad world of the air, and asking its creator with the tongue of its disposition to be a tree, find a perfection worthy of it. If, due to bad temperament, the seed uses the immaterial members given in it, attracting certain harmful substances under the ground, in a short time it will rot and decay in that narrow place without benefit. But if the seed conforms to the creational command of God is the splitter of the seed grain and the date stone, and that's from verse Surah number 6, ayah 95, and employs well those immaterial members, it will emerge from that narrow world, and through becoming a large fruit-bearing tree, its tiny particular reality and its spirit will take on the form of an extensive universal reality. I feel like this is generally in alignment with what everyone else was talking about. But even though, we have a short amount of time, I would like to hear other people's thoughts on it.
It's, he's making a really interesting comparison between man and a seed and using qadar, divine determining, to explain man's potentiality, in that he's given all of these faculties, abilities, and really lack thereof with regards to power and strength to fulfill his needs by power, by divine power. They're present. And there is a program, as he explains, by divine determining, what do you call, a layout or a manual in how it appropriately develops, how the seed appropriately becomes a sapling and then a tree. And really, man's only duty is to not interfere with this divine plan or divine ordinance. Because if he interferes out of his own ego, or as he says, bad temperament, then he spoils that seed of that he is, by attracting harmful substances or this egocentrism that he may have, and then he loses everything that he's in need of. But rather, if man aligns his free will in accordance with divine determining, then he will see how his particular being, what he seems to be an insignificant creature, take on the representation or of an entire cosmic reality, to be witness to and experience all the divine manifestations.
What would be an example of man interfering with divine plan or divine determining?
A simple example would be if something happens to him. Let's say he wishes to accomplish something. Maybe he is in need of something, or let's say he's a practical example. Maybe he has a business and it doesn't do well. If he blames or what his expectation is, the lack of meeting that expectation on the creator, or does not see how it's a reflection of his impotence and powerlessness of himself and the things themselves to fulfill his expectations, then that's a misuse of his immaterial members. He's not using them in accordance with the absolute power, in accordance with divine determining, or how the program is meant to be. And really, you can make that with any sort of example. If he, for example, eats an apple and says, this apple is satisfying my hunger, and my need to be satisfied is also being brought about by my own self. It has no meaning other than looking to myself, my own need to survive. Then that's a misuse of his immaterial members. His need to be satisfied, his need to exist, his satisfaction with the apple, appreciation, that's a misuse of all of those qualities, not in accordance with what they are meant to be, what they're meant to be as being mirrors to him and him alone as a tool to worship him. This awareness being consciousness and awareness being worship of him.
Just to, I think, Austin, you will speak, but I just have a quick question. Just for clarification, when Nursi is referring to immaterial members, that's referring to human qualities, correct? Just want to make sure I got that right. Austin, please go ahead. Okay, Austin is not speaking right now, so if anyone else wants to chip in. Okay.
I actually disagree with Asim. That's one thing. So, divine, he says, the matter members by divine power and the subtle valuable program by divine determining. So I'm leaving these material members by divine power to someone like Yusuf or others, because I don't want to talk about the meaning. So, but anyway, the other part, we don't have time, I guess. A valuable program.
We have 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Valuable program by divine determining. When I read this, it made me like really happy. To me, it talks about the purpose or like an outcome, a goal. At least like the way I see the program. Like I'm thinking about let's say a computer program. If you're a good programmer, every line there has a reason to be there. Like sometimes you delete something, sometimes you change something, sometimes you create, quote unquote, something new which was not there, and then you delete it. But everything, follows an order, and there's a reason for this order for every single step. Like even a comma you put in the program, it has a meaning, it has a reason there. If you put it like one line after, or just one character after you put, everything will be gone. So when I see my life as a program, when I see that every step I take or every step I was made to take, it gives me, again, a satisfaction, a kind of security that I'm going somewhere, I'm reaching somewhere. Like I'm waiting, like first of all, I'm being executed, like in the moment. So I'm not wasted, I'm not left alone. Somebody executing me line by line. And
I have a quick question. How do we make sure that there's not a false satisfaction coming from the comfort of like not making any choices? When we had, okay, it's already determined I'm going to a direction, like, it's like there is this comfort in that, like, oh, you don't have to like worry about it yourself. You don't have to like almost like work for it, whatever it is. So it seems like there is a like fine line there, maybe.
So the growth metaphor is very interesting. Seed is going to become a tree. So there is a progress, there's an extension going on. And I can't help but think of the Confucian, this Chinese philosopher. You can think of him as a Muslim thinker because he is before the prophets coming. So he has something called sprouts of goodness. He also exactly the same actually idea. Sprouts. There are sprouts that will grow into tree. These are heaven. They call it heaven. Actually, I'm sure it means God in the original, but the translators say heaven. They don't want to say God in Chinese philosophy, right? So, or they would say gods, but that's their business. The idea is so. When you stop the extension, you find out. So, for example, the story they tell. I'm sorry for distraction, but I can't help becoming my comparative religion into it. But so they tell a story of a king who was very sorry to see a ram being sacrificed, but he was a tyrant to his people. And this guy, philosopher, he met him, he said, you're a good king. He said, come on, are you kidding me? I kill so many people every day in my kingdom. I oppress them. I extract taxes from them. I'm a tyrant. What are you talking about? He says, no, you have a sprout of goodness. Do you remember when there was this feast of sacrifice something and you saw somebody was going to kill a ram and you said, I can't see this. Don't, let him go. Don't kill him. He said, yeah, I remember that. He said, did you do it because you wanted? He said, no, did you do it so that people will like you? He said, no, I really felt really bad for the ram, so I let it go. He said, but I'm bad. So this philosopher tells him, look, that what you felt for the ram is a sprout. And if you let it grow, it will become a compassion to non-animals as well, your human subjects as well. So why don't you look at, because this king doesn't look at that goodness as a sprout. It's just, it was that moment, that's it. So this says, no, this is actually a sprout, really kind of like the seed, this idea that this is, don't interfere into it, don't cut it off and say that was just that, right? That satisfaction you're talking about, that just did it, that's it. It's not going anywhere. There's no purpose. There's no way it's going to go. So I think that growth metaphor is common in many civilizations, and it's very important because I will know, when I reflect, I will know how come I feel compassion, for example, for this animal, how come I don't grow it to include other beings as well? Right? So it's a made-up story. I mean, there was no such king probably, but it's a way to say these are sprouts that need growth, and they grow. They are made in a way to, as they manifest. If you don't block it, if you don't ignore it, if you think it's not a sprout, it was an accidental compassion I felt just at that moment. So that would be the problem. So that's how you would know is somebody would have to remind you, some wise sage, a prophet's revelation, that actually this is a sprout that is actually going to become a tree. In our language, it is the potential to manifest compassion as much as absolute compassion, potentially. So let it, and you are the one to benefit from it. You are going to not feel like a tyrant king anymore, right? Because he felt he had a very low opinion of himself. He said, I can't be a good person. I kill people. So he said, the sprouts. It's not about you there. So I think that sprout metaphor is interesting. A seed growing into a tree.
One interesting point in here is he's attracting our attention to the verse, God is the splitter of the seed, grain, and date stone. So, because if I personally try to split the seed, I am rotting it.
Yeah.
So by referring to the creator or the meaning aspect of things, then he is going to split it. So it's not me who is going to flourish or get out of the seed and convert into a plant, but through recognizing him, it's going to be split by him, and then would be made into a plant. I guess what you're saying is perfectly matches, because by referring something beyond what you see, things become sprouts. Otherwise, it's just there, like the goodness. It's there because through the evolution or something, right? We have this so that we utilize it in such thing or such, something. But it has its existence as you experience right now, and nothing more. But when you refer, as you say, the meaning, as you refer the creator of these things, then it becomes a sprout. It becomes something with a greater potentiality. Otherwise, it's just a seed. So it's not staying as a seed, it rots to nothing else. But if you go the other way around, now the seed becomes a plant, so it is changing into something other than it used to be. But in us, so if I ask myself, what am I trying to become? I mean, after this discussion finishes, when I go out, what will I strive for? Am I trying to become a better engineer? Am I trying to become a better husband? What am I trying to become? So in here, because the things that I am trying to become is as if the least I am trying to preserve the position of a seed, or I am getting rotten. Am I trying to become something other than a seed? So because the nature of the seed is changing, if you like, in a sense, by sprouting. It's not seed anymore, it's becoming a plant. But in my future goals, let's say, I'm using these terms because they're living in practical terms in our day-to-day life. So in my future goals, do they in any sense include any plan for changing of nature, or at least is it passing on the corner of my head? Or is it I am trying to become a better of a superman, whatever, but still I'm man. So this part makes me question. I'm not clear if in this sense I am on the right path, for instance.
I wanted to answer Osman's question from a certain perspective also. How does one know, or how does one, where is that balance that he was asking about? I think the verse is very appropriate because, as you all mentioned, implicit in the verse is that God is the splitter of the seed grain and date stone, meaning that man's free will is present in the planting of a seed, whether it's the seed external to him or the cultivation of the seed that within, but that he himself does not accomplish anything. He is simply aligning his free will in accordance with God is the splitter. And then maybe even a more practical example would be a man who is ill and he wants to be better, feel better, or return his prior health. He can sit at home and say, please, O giver of health, giver of sickness, please provide me health. And he may do that for a prolonged period of time, but he doesn't get better. In a sense, that's the creator of the universe speaking to him, saying that you must go out and find the cure, or in other words, plant the seed itself. But in planting that seed, do you recognize that it is he who provides the cure? So in a sense, every moment is a sort of speech that one is in conversation with the creator. It in a sense, it prevents that sort of apathy from happening. If you see every moment as a new moment to experience that sort of being operated upon, as Birkan said, or being spoken to.
Yeah, so
But try to keep it short.
yeah, needs are, I think the members here are the needs through which I catch through the experience, the relationship between my need and getting fulfilled. So I think, speaking to your, the more I become aware of my needs are already being met, the more I become aware of how those needs are being met. For example, my need for love is being met. I have some amount of love for someone. I've been given the capacity to love, share love or share or to appreciate something. So there is already, those needs are being met. The more I become aware of them, that's the screwing of the seed into a tree. The more what this is, it's already there. The more needs are being met at the perfect way in a theoretical sense. But my experience of it is limited. So the more I become aware of it, the more I will start living in an abundant world, in the air. The more I will become, from being a seed under the ground, I will become a tree that everyone can, that I'm able to see. I'm able to see how much fruits I bear. What are those fruits? Those fruits are the meeting of the needs, those qualities that meet those needs. So there is a potential for me to become more and more aware how my needs are being met, by whom, to become aware of those qualities. So that in my own world, I become from a little tree. For example, right now, I have been given, or I am every day given, immense love for my child, for example, right? But I am aware of it, of this much, or I attribute it to myself, or don't think about it at all, right? So I could be like an underground seed, like a seed in that sense. But the more I become aware that this is not mine, or this need, I have a need, I've been given a need, and it is being met, the more I become aware of it, the more I become, in my world, a fruit-bearing tree that is demonstrating very clearly a loving one, right? So I have, it is in the nature of that need and that love to become known, to grow. But it's my duty, like everyone is saying, in the free world, to become more and more aware.
Can I make one last quick comment?
Very quick, yes.
Just tying to what Farah said. So man is creating the best form. Then to me, sending down to the lowest of the low. So we have that potential to encounter this world with that potential to get to know the Creator. Then, except those who believe. Then it's up to us to use those potentialities to climb up the ladder of the belief and discover those potentialities in a way that, through those potentialities, understanding the Creator Himself. Then you have the opportunity to go up to the ladder back to the original form. But if you don't use them, then you stay there on that level of lowest of the low, which is basically the rotten seed.
Thank you for that. And I think Brother Osman's comment ties it back to the original ayah that we're discussing really well. Thank you to everyone's comments. I think there is a lot more to be talked about for this topic, but we do need to wrap up because of time. If anyone has any very last few remarks, especially those who might not have spoken yet, you can do so now. If not, we'll wrap up.
سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. آخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. فاتحة.